Centralia, Pennsylvania, May 27, 1962. 6 volunteer firefighters lit a match. They were cleaning up the town landfill before Memorial Day. Burning trash was standard practice. They had done it before. They would douse the flames when the garbage was ash, go home for dinner, and be done with it. What they did not know, what nobody in the town of Centralia knew, was that the landfill sat on top of an abandoned coal mine, and that somewhere beneath their feet there was a 15-foot hole that had been left unsealed when the mine closed. A hole that connected the surface directly to miles of tunnels running through one of the richest coal seams in Pennsylvania. The fire went down the hole. They doused the visible flames that night. 2 days later, smoke appeared again from the same spot. They doused it again. A week later, it came back. They doused it again. The fire did not go out. It has not gone out since. For more than 60 years, a coal seam fire has been burning beneath what used to be the borough of Centralia, Pennsylvania. It has consumed more than 3,000 acres of coal. It has turned a thriving town of over 2,000 people into a ghost town of fewer than 10. It has swallowed roads, cracked foundations, filled basements with carbon monoxide, and opened sinkholes in backyards without warning. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection says the fire could burn for another 250 years before it runs out of fuel. This is the story of what happened to the people who were standing above it when it started, what the government did and failed to do, what it cost to stay, what it cost to leave, and what remains of a town that the United States Postal Service decided, in 2002, no longer existed. To understand Centralia, you have to understand what it was before 1962. The town was founded in the 1860s on land that sat above one of the largest deposits of anthracite coal in the eastern United States. Anthracite was the premium coal of its era, harder, denser, and hotter burning than the bituminous coal that powered most of the country. Pennsylvania anthracite heated the homes of New York and Philadelphia. It fired the furnaces of the steel mills that built American industry. Centralia was built to dig it out. By 1890, the town had nearly 2,800 residents. It had schools, churches, hotels, a theater, and 14 active coal mines. The streets were full of Irish and Welsh and Lithuanian immigrants who had come for the work and stayed for the community. The work was brutal. The mines were dangerous. The Molly McGearys, an Irish secret society that organized against the mine owners, had been active in Centralia in the 1860s, implicated in violence and murder before their leaders were hanged in 1877. The graves of that era are still in St. Ignatius Cemetery on the edge of town, marked with names that tell the story of where those families came from and what they were willing to risk. By the mid-20th century, the coal was running thin. The easy seams had been worked out. The mines closed one by one. The population had dropped from 2,800 to just over 1,000 by 1960. But Centralia was not dying. It was adapting. Families had been there for 3 and 4 generations. The churches were full. The American Legion Hall was active. People knew each other the way people know each other in small towns where everyone went to the same school and buried their parents in the same cemetery. Then 6 firefighters lit a match in the landfill. For the first few years, the fire was an annoyance. Smoke came up through the ground near the old dump site. There was a persistent smell of coal and sulfur. The town council filed reports with the state. Engineers came and looked and left. Various remediation attempts were made. Water pumped into the ground. Trenches dug to try to contain the spread. Slurry of ash and rock injected into the mine tunnels. None of it worked. The fire spread through the tunnel network beneath the town the way water finds its own level. Coal burns slowly, but it burns hot and it burns long. Once a seam is lit underground, with oxygen feeding in through surface cracks and old shaft openings, there is no straightforward way to put it out. You cannot pour enough water, you cannot seal enough tunnels, the fire finds another path. Between 1962 and 1982, various government agencies $7 million trying to extinguish the Centralia fire. Every attempt failed. For most of those years, the residents of Centralia were told the situation was manageable. State agencies issued reports. Federal agencies reviewed the reports. Nothing changed. The town continued to exist in a bureaucratic limbo in which everyone agreed there was a problem and no one agreed on what to do about it. Then, on the morning of February 14, 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski went into his grandmother's backyard. He had noticed some wisps of steam coming from the grass, which was not unusual in Centralia by then. Steam vents had been appearing around town for years as the heat from the fire below warmed the ground. Todd walked over to look at this one. The ground opened beneath his feet. He fell into a hole 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep. Carbon monoxide and superheated gases were venting from below. He grabbed a tree root as he fell. He held on. His cousin Eric Wolfgang heard him screaming and ran over and pulled him out. He had been in the hole for less than a minute. Analysis of the gases later showed that if he had remained for a few minutes longer, the carbon monoxide concentration would have been fatal. That day, by chance, a group of Pennsylvania state politicians was touring Centralia. They learned what had happened within hours of it occurring. A 12-year-old boy had nearly been swallowed alive in his grandmother's backyard by a sinkhole, venting gases from an underground coal fire that had been burning for 19 years. The news went national. The photographs of Todd Domboski, 12 years old, standing at the edge of the hole he had almost died in, ran in newspapers across the country. For the first time, the federal government moved. In 1983, Congress appropriated $42 million to buy and demolish every building in Centralia. The offer was voluntary. Residents could accept the buyout, take the money, and relocate. The state would purchase their homes, demolish the structures, and seed the lots with grass. Most people left. Over the following years, more than 500 homes and businesses were purchased and torn down. Families that had lived in Centralia for 3 and 4 generations packed their belongings and moved to Ashland or Mount Carmel, or wherever they could afford to go. The streets emptied, the storefronts closed. The American Legion Hall came down, the hotel came down. The houses on block after block came down and were replaced with flat green lots that looked, from a distance, like nothing had ever been there. By 1990, 63 people remained. Some of them were elderly and had nowhere else to go. Some of them did not believe the fire was as dangerous as the government claimed. Some of them simply refused to accept that a bureaucratic process in Harrisburg had the right to end a community that their families had built over a century. One of those who stayed was a man named John Lokitis. John Lokitis Jr. had been born in Centralia. His parents lived next door. His grandparents were buried in St. Ignatius Cemetery a few blocks away. He had grown up in the same streets that were now being erased around him, watched neighbors leave year by year, watched their houses come down one by one. He stayed. He painted the town's green benches. He maintained the Veterans Memorial. He gave interviews. He appeared in a documentary in 2007 called The Town That Was, filmed by a director who had come to record what remained before it was entirely gone. In the film, Lokitis walks through the burn zone, describing what the town had been, what it meant to him, why he was still there. 2 years after the documentary was released, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania issued him an eviction notice. His house was demolished in 2010. In 1992, Governor Robert Casey had invoked eminent domain, legally transferring ownership of all remaining Centralia properties to the state. The residents who were still there fought it in court for years. In 2013, the remaining 8 residents reached a settlement with the state government. They were granted the right to stay in their homes for the rest of their lives. When they die, the properties pass to the state. The last official mayor of Centralia was a man named Carl Womer, a World War II veteran who had served with the 70th Division in the Rhineland campaign. He had lived in Centralia most of his life. He refused to leave. He died in his home, and his house was demolished shortly after. The zip code 72927 was revoked by the United States Postal Service in 2002. There are no addresses in Centralia. Mail cannot be delivered there. The town, by the definition used by the postal infrastructure of the United States, does not exist. Here is what remains. The fire is still burning. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection monitors it regularly. It has spread over an area of approximately 3,700 acres and burns at depths of up to 300 feet. The heat signature is visible in thermal satellite imaging. The department's current estimate is that it will continue burning for another 250 years, until it exhausts the available coal. There are sinkholes. There are vents in the hillsides that release steam on cold mornings. There is a stretch of Route 61 that was closed in the 1990s after the asphalt buckled from the heat below, and that became, in the years before it was buried in 2020, covered in graffiti by visitors who made the pilgrimage to walk a road that went nowhere. There is St. Ignatius Cemetery, still intact, still maintained by the diocese, full of graves with Irish and Welsh and Lithuanian names going back to the 1860s. The people who built the town are still there, in the ground, above the fire. There are the foundations of houses, green rectangles of grass where streets once ran, the ghost of a grid that used to hold 2,800 lives. There are a handful of people, fewer than 10, who won the right in 2013 to die in the town where they were born. They live among the foundations and the vents and the slowly sinking ground. And there is the question that was never adequately answered. The question of why it took 21 years, from 1962 to 1983, and a 12-year-old boy nearly dying in his grandmother's backyard before the federal government allocated the money to address the problem. During those 21 years, the state received reports. The federal government received reports. Engineers filed assessments. Bureaucracies exchanged correspondence. $7 million was spent on remediation attempts that did not work and were not scaled to the actual size of the problem. During those 21 years, families in Centralia were breathing carbon monoxide that seeped through the floors of their homes. The levels in some houses were documented at concentrations that exceeded safety thresholds. Children grew up in those houses. Elderly residents with respiratory conditions lived in those houses. The official record of why the response took so long is a record of competing jurisdictions, underfunded agencies, disputed liability, and the particular way that bureaucratic systems handle problems that are expensive to solve and politically costly to acknowledge. It is not a dramatic record. It contains no villains in the conventional sense. It is simply the record of what happens when a community of working-class people in a declining industrial region discovers that the mechanisms meant to protect them operate at a speed determined by budget cycles and political calendars, rather than by the urgency of the problem. John Lakaitis Sr., when asked about the situation in the years before the buyout, said, "Why worry about it? When it comes, it comes." He was not being fatalistic. He was describing a specific kind of resignation that comes from understanding, with complete clarity, that the institution responsible for resolving your situation does not experience the situation the way you do. The fire does not care about budget cycles. The video game Silent Hill was directly inspired by Centralia. The director saw photographs of the burning, fog-shrouded streets and built his nightmare landscape around them. Most people know Centralia through Silent Hill. Most people do not know the name Karl Womer, who served in the Rhineland campaign and refused to leave his town until he died. Most people do not know the name John Lakaitis, who painted the benches and maintained the memorial and appeared in a documentary and was evicted and watched his house come down. Most people do not know the names in St. Ignatius Cemetery, the Irish and Welsh and Lithuanian names of the people who came to Pennsylvania to dig coal out of the ground and built a town on top of what they dug and watched the town burn from the inside out over 60 years. The fire is still burning. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection has a web page about it. The data is updated regularly. The current projection is 250 years. 250 years from now, if the projection holds, the coal seam beneath Centralia will be exhausted. The fire will go out. The ground will cool. There will be no one there to see it. They wrote it down. The engineers who filed the reports. The residents who gave the interviews. The documentary filmmaker who came to record what remained. The journalist David Deacock who wrote the book Fire Underground in 1986, documenting exactly what had happened and exactly how long it had taken the government to respond. They wrote it down, and the fire kept burning anyway. Because that is the other thing that some things do, even when someone is paying attention. They keep burning.